June the 15th, 1930 was a Sunday, and that was the day I was born. I came into this world in 83 Chatham Street in Ardoyne in the north of Belfast, where my parents were lodging with my dad's brother and his wife. They were waiting for a place of their own. My dad was McLaughlin. He was aged 20. He was unemployed and was out for a ride on his bike when I arrived. My mother was Catherine McLaughlin. She was 18 when I was born. I was baptised on the 17th of June in the Holy Cross Church in Ardoyne by Passionist priest Father Richard Curran. My godparents were my dad's brother John and his wife Mary. Fate was to have me reared by my aunt and uncle and brought up in 83 Chatham Street. They couldn't have children of their own, and it was to give consolation to them that this arrangement was made. I then went on to have 6 brothers. They were Malachi, Francie, James, Danny, Paddy and Joe. Chatham Street was quite a long street. It was dissected by 2 other streets, making it form a 3-part street. They called it the top, the middle and the lower. It came to be described as heaven, purgatory and hell. I lived in heaven. The small 2-bedroom houses were built for the linen mill workers and was the main source of income for the people of Ardoyne. I can remember 4 very large mills in the district and another 3 just outside the border of the parish. There was no garden and the toilet was outside in the enclosed yard. There was no baths, but most of the homes had a large tin bath for the usual Saturday night wash. It was a normal sight on a Saturday morning to see the women on their knees outside their front doors with their large buckets of water, carbolic soap and the wooden scrubbing brush, vigorously cleaning the area outside their home. The street's cobblestones were lit by gaslight. 3 gaslight standards lit up our part of the street. A lamplighter came twice daily to light and extinguish the lamps. Many of the backyards of the homes had a large mangle. An iron frame held 2 huge wooden rollers, worked by a vice to regulate the rollers. A big wheel at the side was turned and the washing was put through. In the houses, only the living room had a mantle. The bedrooms were lit by candles or paraffin lamps if one was better off. Cooking was done on a gas cooker, and we paid for it by putting a penny in a meter. This meter was emptied every 3 months, when the housewife would eagerly await the rebate. Some houses had a wireless, some had a gramophone, which was wound by a handle, and a new needle was inserted for each record played. Electric cables were put down in 1936. Ardoyne was a sectarian ghetto with a population 99% Catholic, of which most attended Mass and other devotions. The size of the average family was 5, which was fantastic when you think of such wee houses. I started school in the Holy Cross Primary School on the Crumlin Road, aged 4 and a half. My first teacher was Miss Farrell. She had also taught my dad, and she had never seemed to age. I was with Miss Farrell for 2 years, and then with a Mr. Thompson for 4 years. I became a very good friend of Mr. Thompson, or Spike as he was known, because of his large pointed nose, and I was a regular visitor at his home. I went for long walks with him and was in his group of youth hospitallers and went weekends to hostels all over Ireland. He was a convert to the Catholic faith, and the last I heard of him, he was a teacher in a public school in England. I finished my elementary schooling with a Mr. Higgins and left at the age of 12 in 1942. I sat the entrance exam for the Irish Christian Brothers Secondary School in Barrack Street, Belfast, and I was accepted. I attended there from 1942 until 1945, when I obtained my junior leaving certificate, and I left in June 1945 to work in the Maypole Dairy Company in their branch at 315 York Street in Belfast. I started as a messenger boy at 16 shillings a week, from which I got 5 shillings a week pocket money. Out of this I paid my tram fare and bought my 11 o'clock piece. I worked from 8:30 a.m. until 6 p.m. Monday, Tuesday and Thursday, and from 8:30 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday. and from 8:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. on a Friday and a Saturday. I was with the Maypole for 9 years until 1954. During that time, I got 27 pay rises. I was promoted from first counter hand to senior counter hand to charge hand to assistant manager to probationary branch manager and finally to branch manager of my own shop at 315 York Street in Belfast. I was now earning £8 and 10 shillings a week, out of which I got £2, 6 shillings pocket money. During my employment with Maypole, I was chosen as their Irish rep at a training seminar in Worcester, England. In 1947 as a junior and in 1951 as a potential manager. I finished first of 12 on both occasions. At the age of 17, I wrote an article on the grocery trade and I had it included in the firm's magazine, The Maypolean, which had a circulation of about 7,000. I worked there during the last days of the war against Japan. The war in Europe was over, but rationing was still on, making way for the black market, a great deal of which went on. I can honestly say I never once took part in it, though many times I was propositioned. I was innocent in those days. In 1954, I moved from Maypole to Stewart's Cash Stores as branch manager at number 111 Crumlin Road after a short training spell at their Ardoyne branch. This was a bad mistake I made leaving the Maypole. I was unsettled for a few years, going to Roycroft's, Lipton's, and then to Wilson's and Doe Road, White Abbey, where I remained for 7 years as provisions manager. I was mainly happy, but not well paid and with a growing family. Later, in an effort to better my wages, I moved to Rathcoole, but it was a disaster, and I returned to Wilson's, where I stayed until 1964. Then I moved to O'Kane's in Riverdale, Belfast, as his manager. Then in 1967, after a combination of ill health and disagreements with O'Kane, I finally moved to his opposition, the Busy Bee, and then to Coatbridge in Scotland in the same year. Ill health restricted my work life then, but I worked at several jobs, Cochrane's, Cassidy's, Campbell's, and finally, in 1972, I had to stop working altogether. I think that I became aware that there were girls in the world about the age of 7. There were no girls in my school. It was strictly a boys' school. The girls were 1.5 miles down the road. The girls didn't take part in our games, rally-o, cowboys and Indians, piggy and stick, kick the can, football and hoop racing. I had an ulterior motive for having my first girlfriend. It was like this. I was sent from my Aunt Mary's messages every day, several times a day, to Ned Reed's shop at the corner of Elm Street, at Butler Street. I had to go to that particular shop because my aunt, she got her messages on tick. Everything was marked down in a wee notebook, and she paid for it faithfully every Friday. Teresa Reed, Ned's daughter, helped out in the store and nearly always managed to serve me with a shy smile. She always gave me a chocolate caramel and would arrange to meet me at the Forum, the local picture house, for the children's matinee on Saturday mornings. I looked forward to it, for she gave me 10 caramels then. I lost Teresa when Sean McAfee came along, and she went for him. There was no more sweets for me, and that finished me with the girls. I had no time to be bothered with them anyhow. Football was my passion then, and I spent all my spare time playing it. I'll tell you about Teresa Reed though. She was about a year older than me. She was very manly in physique. She turned out to be a fine camogie player, the female hurling game. She married quite young and had a large family. She's dead now. One of her sons was murdered by the IRA for informing, and she was badly affected. She took to drinking, and sadly the drink killed her. She would have been about 54 when she died. When I started in the Maypole Dairy at 15, all the girls were much older and didn't concern me. When I was about 20, I started going to dancing classes, ballroom and later American. I went with my pals and the girls went with their pals. We had particular partners during the dances, but it never occurred to us to take them home. At the end of each dance, we returned to our pals, and the girls went with their pals to the other side of the hall. Now and again, a girl customer in the shop or an assistant in the nearby shop would attract my attention, and I would make a date for the pictures. But 2 dates was a limit. I hadn't many free nights in the week anyhow, with one thing and another. Then I had a phase in my life where I was very unsettled. I wasn't content in my work, something was lacking. I spoke to a Father Joseph and a Brother Brendan, both passionists. A thought was on my mind, which I kept pushing away, only for it to return. One night at this time, I went to the pictures on my own. The film was Never Take No for an Answer, about a wee boy whose donkey was ill, and he decided to take it to St. Francis's tomb to be cured. I loved that film, and straight afterwards I went home and I wrote to the Franciscan prior in Merchant's Quay in Dublin. My answer was to come and visit them for a few days. I eventually spent 9 days there, and I was advised to go home and say daily a simple prayer that they had given me. If I liked, I could come back in September. This was in May 1953. I was never to go back, for my prayers were answered in a very special way. Early in September, I went with my pals Cassidy and McGurk to Bundoran in Donegal for a week's holiday, still considering going back to Merchant's Quay when I returned. The first night we arrived in Bundoran was late in the season, and a lot of the entertainment had finished. We saw an advert for a dance in Ballyshannon, and a bus would take us from the railway station. We waited for the bus, but it never came. 2 young ladies were also waiting for the bus, so we helped them get taxis, and eventually we all arrived at the dance. We found out they were sisters and had come from Glasgow. I danced with the younger sister, Margaret. We had tea, and we had our photos taken with the hall photographer. They then proceeded to dance with other partners. Several days later, we called at their guest house, Strabane House, and they came to the pictures in Ballyshannon with us. We walked at home from Ballyshannon, and I had the opportunity to have a long chat with Margaret. Next day, we met at a mock auction on the seafront and spent most of the afternoon with them. We met at our digs that evening, and after a sing-song, we went to a dance. I enjoyed that dance, and I danced with both sisters most of the evening. We were going home the next day, but the girls still had several days left. They were going to Glasgow via Belfast, and on a Thursday, I met them at the Great Northern Railway Station and took them to my home at 83 Chatham Street. After a cup of tea, we visited the Holy Cross Church. We went for a walk around the district, and later I left them to the Glasgow boat and said cheerio. That was September, and I kept thinking of Margaret. I had a new impetus in my life now, and I knew in my heart I wouldn't be going back to Merchant's Quay. December came, and I took the opportunity to send Margaret a note, which to my great pleasure, she sent one to me. In January 1954, we started to correspond every week, and at Easter, I invited Margaret over for a few days. She accepted and stayed from Friday until Monday. In July, the 2 sisters and a friend, Sadie Layden, went back to Bundoran and called en route. I still had holidays to get, and was invited to come to their home in Glasgow early in September. I got on the Glasgow boat at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday night, intending to stay for a week. I arrived in Glasgow at 6:30 a.m. the following morning, and waited 2 hours at the docks until Margaret turned up. She had slept in. I had a happy time, meeting her mother, her father and her brother Tony, and I asked if I could stay for an extra few days, which was granted. I also met Margaret's sister Betty and her husband Alex in their home in Springburn, and Teresa's boyfriend, Tommy Logue. Before I left for home, I asked Tommy, Margaret's father, if I could get engaged to Margaret with a view to marrying her in the future. He spoke to me on his thoughts and he said yes, which sent me home happy. We picked the feast of the Immaculate Conception, the 8th of December 1954, to become engaged. I was ill and confined to bed on that day, but I posted the engagement ring on and started to say prayers for our wedding day, leaving it in the hands of our Holy Mother. In February 1955, my uncle died, and Margaret came over for the wake and funeral. She stayed a few weeks to be a source of consolation to Aunt Mary. She went home to be in time for her sister Teresa's wedding to Tommy Logue. During her stay, we arranged to be married on the feast of the Holy Name of Mary on the 12th of September 1955. Our Lady had a special place in our plans. It was agreed that Margaret would come over to be married in my parish. She would have to be resident at least 1 month before the wedding to comply with the church law. She came to Belfast on the 10th of August 1955 to prepare for our wedding, and we were married on Monday, the 12th of September 1955 at 8 a.m. in the Holy Cross Church. Father Gabriel McCarthy celebrated the nuptial mass. My brother Francis was best man, and my cousin Mary McLaughlin, a friend of Margaret's, was bridesmaid. Tommy, her father, gave her away. Her mother and Tony, her young brother, were also present. The reception was a breakfast and was held at number 83 Chatham Street, with the overflow next door in number 85, the home of a good friend and neighbour, Annie Jones. We went on honeymoon to Portrush, a seaside resort on the Antrim coast, where we spent a very happy week. We then went back to begin living our married life in 83 Chatham Street, still living with my Aunt Mary, me to go to work in Stuart's cash stores, and Margaret to run the home. With 2 women in the house, of different ages, temperament and outlook, life wasn't a bed of roses for Margaret, and there were disagreements. I would call her Mum from now on. I was at work every day, and Mum was left on her own in a strange country and just starting to make friends. At night we would go to the pictures or the different services in the church, confraternity, novena, etc. And my Aunt Cassie and her 2 old pals and Murphys would come round and visit for tea. At weekends on Sundays, we went on bus tours to parts of Northern Ireland and to occasional dances in the Ardoyne Hall. We wanted to start a family, but were disappointed in our plans. Then Mum took a job in a very Protestant area of Belfast. It was difficult, and she took insults from one member of staff in particular, but it was extra cash, and it let Mum get a little extra for herself. In September 1956, we made the 9-night novena to Our Lady of Sorrows in the Holy Cross, and John was conceived. The Christmas Day of 1956 saw heavy snowfall all morning, and after our Christmas dinner, we started off in the still falling snow. We fairly enjoyed walking around the crypts in various churches, and we covered a 4-mile radius. I mention this because we enjoyed it so much. John was born on the 29th of May 1957, and he came home from hospital a week later. We had a rented TV by then. TVs were just out at this time. Only 3 other people in our street had one. My young brothers came up nearly every night to watch and have tea, so the house was quite busy most nights. Bernadette was born on the day that Northern Ireland played West Germany in the World Cup, and was born at home. I remember my dad asking me when I told him about the birth, "Can I still come and see the game on your TV?" So we had a full kitchen of men watching the game, and upstairs there was a full room of women with the new baby. Ireland drew with West Germany and went on to the last 8 of the World Cup in 1958. Tam was born on my birthday in 1959 in the home at 8 p.m, and Chatham Street was getting that bit smaller. In April, Mum gave birth to a stillborn girl in the house. The midwife gave her a conditional baptism, naming her Edel. I took her in a little box tied with ribbon and buried her in the cemetery. It was a sad day, but we have a saint in heaven, please God. It would be a good idea to ask her for help sometime. After 7 years on the housing list, we eventually got a place of our own. Mr. Wilson, my boss, was responsible for getting us that house. It was a 4 apartment, a quarter of a mile from my work, It was a lovely house with a front and back garden. It was near to the beach, and we often pushed the pram down to it and relaxed there. Kevin was born on the 14th of May 1961. My Aunt Mary died of a heart attack that night. She had been in poor health for a long time. Mary was born on the 23rd of November 1962. Kevin and Mary were baptised in the Star of the Sea Church in White Abbey. John, Bernadette and Tam had started school there. It was an old school and it was just opposite the beach. On good days the class would have lessons on the beach. In September 1964 we moved again. I got a job with O'Kane's in Belfast and he got us a house in a very Catholic area of the city. And so we moved to number 69 Riverdale Gardens. Martin was born on the 12th of November 1964 in the City Hospital in Belfast, and he came home the next day. For some time, we had considered moving to Glasgow. Mum had been in Ireland for 12 years. On the 12th of December 1966, Jerry was born at 9 a.m. at 69 Riverdale Gardens, and just as he was born, the postman delivered a letter making the move to Glasgow possible. We followed it up, and in late June 1967, we exchanged our home with a family in Coatbridge, at number 29 Coulter Avenue. Rita was born on the 13th of March 1968 in Bells Hill Maternity Hospital, and on the 30th of December 1969, Frankie was born, and our family was complete. In April 1972, we moved to 169 Lomond Road, with the family growing up fast. Bernadette married Brian Morgan in 1978 and lived with us until 1979 when they got a place of their own. In 1982, we moved north to Torhead and Pluskerton, near Elgin. Pluskerton, in the following decade, saw the family flee the nest and go on to make their own way in the world. Mum and I moved again, and we lived in Clyde Lane in New Stevenson for a while, before moving back to Coatbridge to live at number 4 Selby Street. This was to be our last flit. Our next move was to be to the care home, due to faltering health and out of necessity. I'll update you on the family's current situation before I go on. Bernadette and Brian went on to have 2 boys, Brian and Martin. They have been married for almost 35 years now. John settled down in Largs and has been there for more than 20 years. Tam married Teresa Rennie, and they live near Girvan with their 2 boys, Tommy and Anthony. Kevin moved to London and married Esther in the 80s and had 2 kids, Andrew and Christina. He still lives in London and is happily remarried to Kim Dixon. Mary married Tommy McNally and had 2 kids with him, Martin and Michelle. This brought Tommy's number of kids to 17, 15 from his previous marriage. Fate was to leave Tommy with a brain injury in Summerlee Care Home in Coatbridge. Martin became a Benedictine monk at Prinish Abbey in Gloucester and is currently bursar. Jerry married Coco. They now live in France with their daughters Mary and Sophie. Rita became a Benedictine nun and fulfilled her role for over 25 years. Fate was to have her leave the convent. She is now happily married to Colin Sim. They now live a married life together in their old house in Torhead in Pluskerton. Frankie moved to London before going to America where he married Chrissy. Things didn't work out and he returned in 2003 to Coatbridge where he now lives and works. I can remember being taken by my Uncle John every afternoon to the Holy Cross Church. I was about 4. My uncle was unemployed at the time. I would visit all the altars there, the High Altar, Our Lady's, the Sacred Heart, St. Joseph, St. Paul of the Cross, and I would go round all the statues, St. Patrick, St. Anthony, St. Gabriel. I didn't know if I said any prayers, but I liked visiting the altars while my uncle said his prayers. I was also taken to the devotions at night time, the Rosary and Benediction on Sundays, and the Stations of the Cross every Friday. I made my first confession to a Father Marcellus at the age of 5, and my first Holy Communion the next morning. Afterwards, our First Communion class went to a school, where we had a breakfast put on for us. I had a new suit and a Sacred Heart badge pinned onto my jacket. On the first Thursday of every month, we were taken from school to confessions in preparation for the first Friday Mass. I was confirmed when I was 5.5 years old. I was given the name Joseph. I then learned to do the Stations of the Cross and went with my uncle every afternoon after school, and we went round the 15 stations. At the age of 9, I joined the altar boys until the age of 16, during which I was promoted through all the grades: red, silver, blue, gold, sub-prefect, and then prefect. The morning I served Mass on my own for the first time was a special day for me. I served it on the side altar, the Sacred Heart altar, and I earned a penny from my uncle. My greatest day was when I served 7 Masses, starting at 6:30 in the morning and ending at 12 noon. I regularly served 3 Masses daily, and sometimes 2 Masses at once. I would kneel between the 2 altars and serve both priests. Holy Cross has an average of 20 priests, the Cross and the Passion congregation. Every November from the 2nd until the 10th, a novena of Stations of the Cross for the Dead was held, with an overcrowded church every night. For 6 years in a row, I carried the cross. It had no figure, but it had all the implementations of torture on it. At the age of 12, I found the junior ranks of the Legion of Mary. Father Ephraim was the spiritual director. He had a great influence on me as regards to Our Lady. I was 6 years in the junior ranks, holding the office of secretary for 5 of those years. At 18, in 1948, I went into the senior ranks and was a member of the Mater Dolorosa Presidium until 1961, when I moved out of the parish. I held the office of secretary, treasurer, vice president and president. I rejoined when I came to Coatbridge and was a member from 1968 until 1974. I became president in Coatbridge, but ill health prevented me from fulfilling my full term of office. I started the Junior Boys Presidium as a special tribute to the Legion's 50 years in Scotland, and I helped with an intermediate Presidium. I am still an auxiliary member. I was a founding member and the first president of a young man's arts confraternity of the Sacred Passion. It was founded by Father Joseph and had 700 members. We had meetings on Thursdays, and the church was under the patronage of Our Lady of Sorrows and St. Gabriel. Father Joseph was another influence in my life. I forgot to mention a very important priest in my altar days. He was an old priest, Father Benedict. I served at Mass every day on the Our Lady altar for nearly 4 years, and he gave me 2 pennies daily and a special present at Christmas. I also served his Requiem Mass. May he rest in peace. My mother, Catherine McLaughlin, known as Kathleen, was born on the 27th of February 1911. She was one of a family of 3 sisters and 3 brothers. Her parents were Daniel McLaughlin and Rebecca McBriarty. She was born in the Republic of Ireland, and her family moved to Belfast early on in her life to make a home at 42 Elmfield Street in Ardoyne. My mum worked alternative days in the linen mill and went to school on the other days. This was normal practice then. As a child, she loved and she took part in Irish dancing and drama. She had parts in amateur drama with people who later made names for themselves as professionals, on stage and screen. She married my dad, Malachy McLaughlin, on Christmas Day in 1928, just before her 18th birthday. As she was already a McLaughlin, she didn't need to change her name at marriage, and because of this, she was said to have a charm, giving her a cure for a whooping cough, which was very prevalent at the time. I remember people coming from all over Belfast with their children to get cured. My mum would give them a piece of butter as part of the cure. This continued right up until 1966. After the wedding, she lived with my dad in his brother John's house in 83 Chatham Street. And as you know, I was born there on the 15th of June 1930. Around about this time my dad was playing professional football, but he was earning shillings more than pounds. Due to disagreements with my Aunt May at number 83 Chatham Street, they moved out, but as they didn't have a place of their own, my mum moved in with her mother and sister, and my dad to his father and his sister in Butler Street. My mum then suffered a miscarriage, and then in July 1933, Malachy, her second son, was born. In order to get the family reunited, they took a room in the old Ardoyne village, and after that a room in a tenement on the corner of Butler Street. Francie was born soon afterwards. My dad's football career came to an end then. He needed a cartilage operation, but decided against having it. He was still unemployed and was finding it difficult to find work in the poor, depressed 1930s. We moved house again, this time to stay with an old lady, living on her own in number 27 Chatham Street, Lizzie Burns. Mum looked after this old and chronically ill woman, and they got on very well there. When old Lizzie died, Mum and Dad got the lease of the house. This was the first house on their own. They lived there until 1975, when they moved up the street to number 75 Chatham Street. James A. Darry, Paddy and Joe were born in the years that followed. In 1939, the war started, and my dad was interned, and he spent a while in England working. So my mum had a difficult time rearing her young family on a very limited income. My mum became ill in 1945, and cancer of the womb was diagnosed. The womb was removed, and after a lengthy period of convalescing, she recovered. She loved to take us for long walks to the outskirts of Belfast, around Cave Hill, and we would gather berries and flowers. She loved flowers. I recall her wrapping me in a big black shawl. I was feeling very snug in her arms, and she carried me to the chip shop on the Crumlin Road. When the war ended in 1945, my dad returned home and had more constant employment. My mum was able to get a part-time job. She was cleaning in the local school. She made many lifelong friends there, especially among the boys in the school, and she had a caring, motherly calm with the youngsters. Around about 1953, she developed ulcers on the veins of her legs, which normally would have healed with treatment, but the dormant cancer reared its head again and made them impossible to heal. She suffered great pain and distress with this condition for 25 years, only getting remissions for periods of time. In 1972, whilst working in the school, she was attacked by a group of Protestant youths. She was knocked to the ground by one wielding an axe, resulting in her right arm being useless and eventually having to be taken off at the shoulder. My mum always kept cheerful and helpful, but her health was never good after that. She suffered several slight heart attacks and had constant gallbladder trouble, and then a major heart attack in 1981 when she was not expected to last the night. She recovered and was discharged from hospital to take things very easy at home. My dad did all the housework after she got home. In 1983, despite constant nursing, she took another heart attack. Her heart was now in very poor condition, and my brother Paddy took her to his home to look after her and closed number 75 Chatham Street. She improved slightly, and in 1984 she moved into an old house on Elmfield Street with a view to getting a new house in the rebuilt old Ardoyne area. She got number 25 Elmfield Street in a new estate. She lived there for 2 years, but was now housebound and in poor health. In 1986, she had another heart attack and had to be constantly looked after and was not allowed to climb stairs. My brother Malachy arranged for my Aunt Cassie to go into a hospice for the terminally ill persons, and as her bungalow was now vacant, he arranged for my mum to move there. She lived for another 2 years in the bungalow, still housebound, only getting out by ambulance to the hospital 3 days a week, or when one of my brothers would take her out on a special event. I went to Belfast to visit her on the 13th of July 1988 and spent a happy week with her. We chatted and we looked at photos. I would make her a bite to eat, and on the morning of Friday the 22nd of July 1988, I took her breakfast to her room, only to find her dead. May she rest in peace. My dad, McLaughlin, was born in September 1909 in number 15 Butler Street in Ardoyne. He was the youngest in a family of 6 boys and 1 girl. His father was James McLaughlin and his mother was Ellen McGough. He went to the Holy Cross Boys' School until he was 12, when instead of being sent to work alternate days, which was the custom, he was sent to St Malachy's College, a secondary school on the Antrim Road. This was on the advice of the headmaster of the Holy Cross, who considered he was above average and that he might make a good teacher. He sat the entrance exam and he was successful. St Malachy's College was, and still is, a prep school for students for the priesthood and other professional bodies. My dad left with a standard certificate and a certificate for penmanship. He played in the football team and he was picked up by a scout for Linfield in the Old Irish League. He played in the Linfield Swifts team that played in the Intermediate League, and he won many honours in the junior ranks. He moved into the senior team and he gained a runners-up Irish Cup medal against Belfast Celtic, who beat them 3-1. My dad played it right back in that final, and he was opposed by one of Belfast Celtic's most famous wingers, Mahood. My dad played Mahood out of the game, so much so he was chosen to play for Ireland against Wales in 1929, and again against England in the spring of 1930. From Linfield, he moved on to Bangor, playing in the Irish League, and after a spell of injuries, which curtailed his playing, he decided to end his professional career. He was unemployed for some time then, getting spells of labouring for builders. Around about this time, he became involved with the Young Republican organisations, outlawed by the British government. He was an active member of the IRA when he came of age. The IRA mainly used him to defend the district from attacks, especially from the Black and Tans. He was playing handball against the wall in Butler Street one day with a pal when the Black and Tans came in armoured cars and fired shots at him. They killed his pal, and incidentally, they just missed my Aunt May, who was passing by at the time. My dad became more active then and was an officer organising groups in the Gaelic League. He was taken from his bed one night and he was taken for interrogation by the RUC. He was kept for 2 days without food and then he was allowed to come home. He went to England for a while and he got work there after that. Our house in 83 Chatham Street, though, was raided nightly for about 6 weeks. I remember a flashlight blinding me as the RUC and the specials woke me in my bed. I was only about 7. My Uncle John took it up with the local councillors and eventually it was stopped. At the outbreak of the war in 1939, internment was brought in and the jails were full. A ship was anchored in Belfast Lock. It was named the prison ship. My dad was interned on it for 18 months. My mum would take me there to visit several times. She was allowed on board once a month. When my dad was released, he went back to England to work again, but he would come home at regular intervals to visit the family. Towards the end of the war, he came home and he got a job with an American company just outside Belfast, which lasted many years. After this, he was idle again for some years, just getting postman's jobs at Christmas, which helped. Then out of the blue one day, went out for a walk in the park, he saw an advert looking for labourers in various parks in the city. He applied and he got a job in the Falls Park. He loved it and had a good happy few years there. Then ill health started, slowly at first, a few weeks every year, then it would be longer. Then my dad had a heart attack, so at 64 he retired and he went downhill fast until he became housebound, and in 1981 my dad died. May he rest in peace. He was always mild-mannered. He never had much money. He enjoyed a pint with his pals in the bar every Friday and Saturday, and he loved a bet. In 1972, he was blown up in McGurk's bar when 15 people were killed, and he was in hospital for 3 weeks. His nephew Thomas was killed that night. My dad received £1,100 compensation, and for the first time in his life, he had a few pounds to spend. He enjoyed coming over to Scotland to visit us, and he made many good friends here. In the last 15 years of his active life, he was a daily Mass attender, a silver jubilant in the confraternity of the Sacred Passion, and all his life he made his first Friday communion. I had a strong affinity with him. I found him to be a great help just by listening to my problems. I took his advice many times, and I found it to be sound. I copied his example many times. That is how I remember my dad, and this is my life up until now. My dad, John McLaughlin, died in the early hours of the Saturday the 7th of December 2013. He was 83 years old. His Requiem Mass was held in St Bartholomew's in Coatbridge on the 12th of December and was celebrated by his son, Father Martin, with a good friend, Father Bede, in attendance. He was laid to rest in the Coltswood Cemetery in Coatbridge. May he rest in peace.